So I'm curious, where would you suggest this inner journey begin? What is a first step that? Because I think that we've, at least in my understanding, I think that we've unpacked a good understanding of why it's imperative to journey within and get clarity around who God made you to be, how to fully step into all that He has designed into you, how to sort of hear your calling in the world and start to walk out and activate that, not tied to a job, but sort of tied to your identity. Right. So there's quite an urgency around men, people in general, men specifically, to really investigate this space. So what's a good first step to really to move into it?
Gosh, Ted, I think I find that there's something that you had said earlier. I don't remember whether it's on camera or off camera, but that as we're younger, it's not always an issue of chronology and age, but it often is that as we're developing in our humanness, that we're going through developmental stages, that I believe at some point we reach a point as men, and it often happens mid 30s to mid 40s, where we bump into our own limitations. Mm-hmm. And it's a family dynamic, it's a personal dynamic, it's a global pandemic dynamic, in which our willpower and our intellect and our kind of moral stance can't take care of the thing that seems immovable. Mm-hmm. And I think often that's the place where we're really given a choice. We're really offered an invitation by God to say that this is a shifting point. Mm-hmm. I think the work that we can be doing as we're on our way to that, because I think every one of us is given our opportunity. Sometimes it circles around over and over and over until we accept it and surrender to it. Mm-hmm. But I think the ways in which we can begin to create rhythms in our lives, spiritual rhythms in our lives, of being connected to sacred texts, reading the scriptures in some form or fashion, mm-hmm. on a fairly regular basis. Mm-hmm. And I include poetry in that for me. It's a really deeply connecting place. Mm-hmm. I think silence, prayer, meditation are really important. And here we are talking, for an hour or so, but we have been taught to use words to describe so much, and we end up talking more than we need to listen. Mm-hmm. I think of it as the 2-to-1 rule that we have. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and then maybe we listen twice as often.
The divine ratio.
Yes, exactly. And that silence for some people can be really uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And it's meant to be, because we're encountering our limitation in that. We're encountering the fullness and presence of God in ways that we can't explain or know fully. Mm-hmm. And it's much more about an experience and an encounter, not about an assent, mm-hmm. or even a doctrine. Mm-hmm. So all the things that I'm speaking about today are born out of experiencing God in our lives, not just thinking about God or ideas about God. Right. And so for me, I consider movement an important part of that, whether it's walking, hiking. I do some Qigong practice, which is kind of a meditative form of Tai Chi, mm-hmm. just so I'm not, because I sit so much, I just don't want to be engaging this part of who I am. I want to be engaging my body that holds my experience. And it took me a while to come to terms and embrace that as okay, that was okay to consider part of my spiritual practice.
Yes, I think much of our spiritual experience has been limited or confined to listening and ingesting and understanding.
It's a great word for it.
All the ways in which, all the tools that God has given you to work out this soul, spirit, body, mm-hmm. life.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think another part of that is the exploration of questions.
Mm.
I think I have found myself in the last decade or so being really engaged by what I call guiding questions. Questions that the poet Rilke would say that we cannot bear to answer, and we wouldn't know the answer anyway. The idea is to live into the question.
Mm-hmm.
And what does it mean? I remember the first time my spiritual director, this is probably 20 something years ago, said, could you try to live that question? I'm like, what are you talking about? And because it was just such foreign language.
Yeah.
And now it's so resonant to literally sometimes carry a question and be with it in my curiosity. And I'll often ask men as they're leaving the building here after a meeting, if they can wonder about this thing that's arisen in our conversation. Can you wonder about that and not decide? And stay in a place of curiosity and wonder. That is the place that I believe God meets us in a uniquely different way than when we're relying on our own intellect to get us to answer. It's a very, I would say it's a holy with a WH and a holy with an H, different experience. Like I have here sitting on my table, because I said I have a stone that I've been carrying for a number of years. And it's a companion stone. I call it a courage stone. And I have a whole trough of them here for people to take when they come in. And it's a way in which I can ask the stone to help me carry the question. It's a reminder, it's a visual reminder, it's a physical reminder, both that I'm not alone in this. There's something about the weight of the stone that is noticeable, but is also not too heavy. And so if I put that in my pocket when I go on a walk, I'm aware that I'm carrying this thing. And it's a reminder of paying attention to it.
Yeah, I think, and this is another question that I wanted to get your perspective on, is that I feel like, and I know from my own personal experience, that there are a lot of distractions that keep men from introspection. I think the conversation, the Fathers Arise conversation that we had, I had prior to this with this wonderful man, Richard Leong, which actually sparked having this conversation with you, is that his observation, and he's in his mid-70s, was that men don't often engage in introspection as kind of being a general thing to say, but through lived experience, I would agree that is an obstacle or a pitfall that constantly has kept me from taking that off ramp into the deeper places. And so it sounds like, having a device of some sort that is a physical or some trigger that'll sort of pull you back to the importance of that work has been a healthy device for you to, and other men as well, to kind of keep that work ever present amidst all the other work that we have to do.
It does. I think there is this sense of being reflective that feels really esoteric and kind of disembodied. And there's, for me, the practice of carrying or holding a stone is a tactile, physical reminder to, as my recovery friends would say, to be where my feet are. My spiritual director loves the phrase, be here now and be somewhere else later. And I think in your relationship to your distraction comment, we're often not where we are. We are the only creature on the planet that can not be where we are. It's the blessing and the curse of being present and not being present. And that it is a deliberate choice, an ongoing choice, not just a one-time choice. I keep choosing to be in this conversation. And that asks something of me. And it's a cost that I want to keep investing in or paying.
It's interesting because I feel like, with the rise of social media and digital, and there are an exponential amount of inputs that we are now faced with day in and day out, where they are, or they can be, invitations to distraction, and they can be ways in which we allow ourselves to get pulled away from where we are. And I wonder, some of the practices that you had mentioned earlier to really build, people can build into their days to keep them on the path towards spiritual formation, which is walking, maybe writing, journaling, having questions that sort of lead you through your day. It feels like, even things that I've done, which is just fasting, whether it's food or from any sort of digital connections at all, to really silence the noises around me, to really get clarity on who I am, where I am. I mean, I'm in a moment, every man is in a moment in their life, and only really the Holy Spirit can sort of tell them exactly the moment in time where they're at, and you can't hear that still small voice. There's so much spinning.
Yeah. For a number of years, I taught this freshman epistemology course. It's called Ways of Knowing. And it was really fun to teach. And my sections were called The Art of Paying Attention. And I would ask the students on the first day of class every semester, and I said, and I really mean this sincerely, and not in a kind of a classic shaming way. If we're not paying attention, what are we doing? And identifying something, a relationship, a conversation, like we're talking about here, that I want to pay attention to means I have other choices to make. And for me, it's much more about making a choice to say yes to something rather than just saying no to something. Richard Rohr's, one of the people that I read pretty regularly, talks about we have to have a yes to be able to say no. And so what are we saying yes to? And I think the distractions seem like an easy yes, but it's actually saying no to us.
Right.
And I really want to turn that, for men in particular, to live with this sense of curiosity about who they are and how they carry this unique image of God that's been given to them to live into and out of. And I don't know what that looks like for you, but I'd like to know. And I'm learning what that looks like for me every day in different ways.
I think what's interesting about our particular moment in time, because this is a moment that we have never really experienced, at least in my generation, I mean, globally speaking, in terms of being sort of where we are in our homes and sort of away from one another in a physical sense, is that it's actually caused a lot of either you choose to confront or you choose to avoid thoughts that are coming up, or how you spend your day, or as the distractions of driving to work or going out with friends or going to dinner, like all of these things that tend to be the pillars of our life that we orient our patterns around, those are all removed. And I think a lot of people have found they're a little shaky. One practice that I have found that's been useful, not just in my own life, but in the work that we do in our consulting with companies and individuals, is understanding what your convictions are. To your point around choices, it's easy to say yes or no when you have a conviction around something. And I'm curious, I didn't give you this question, but I'm going to throw you a curveball. Is there a conviction that has, or that you would call a conviction, that is a grounding element for you in your life that has helped you make those choices in the face of, what might be a difficult choice to make?
Yeah, there is. It comes to the word that I would use to describe that would be integration. And it goes back to that quote from Parker Palmer. And he has a number of ways in which he talks about it, as living an undivided life, or living divided no more, is that I truly believe that God's desire for us is to be integrated and to experience the fullness of ourselves which means then we get to experience that unique part of us that is the image bearer of God. And that then means I have choices to make and keep making in order to move toward or live into an integration of my thoughts, my feelings, my values, my convictions, my desires, my hope, my relationships. And all of those things ask something of me. And those are the choices I want to keep making. And as a fallible human like the rest of us, I sometimes don't make those choices. I make the distraction choices because it's just, I'm exhausted. Or I've been giving myself all away all day in conversations like this. I've just got nothing left. But I also want to be curious about, did I need to give all that away in that way? Could I have reserved some for my wife for us to have a conversation? Or am I just a zombie on the couch and I veg out, to get up to do it again tomorrow? Like all of those mean something. For me. And Brene Brown's fond of saying, we are meaning-making people. And we move into meaning that we choose to make, or we move into things that create meaning for us. And I think to your point with distractions and maybe a lack of integration, we end up getting pulled into meaning that's not of our making.
That's good. I think that would be a helpful understanding for men to understand, is that the choices that we make lean our priority and our being into different places, and there's a cost.
There's a cost for everything. There's a cost for you and I sitting here and having this conversation, and we both chose to pay the cost of it. I would call it an investment, but it's different language for the same thing.
Right. But I think part of the value in undertaking the inner journey is just some of the recognition of that. It's not. I think one of the moments when I realized sort of moving from having sort of a boy mentality into exploring and understanding more of what it means to be a man, a husband, a father, is the recognition of the responsibility of where I put my time, where I put myself, and the cost of who bears that cost. And if I'm not being wise and responsible and selfless around where I'm putting that time, my kids might have to pay for it, or my wife might have to pay for it, or my employees might have to pay for it. So there's this threshold from selfishness to selflessness that I think comes with that threshold crossing. That I'm curious if there was a moment or an understanding that you had in that sort of transitional sort of cycle, I guess, from boy to man, that sort of has framed your understanding.
I struggle with that question a bit. I don't really have a specific memory. There's kind of a period of time in my life, early teens, when I began to realize, I think it was a movement out of idealism into a reality. A lot of that was some engagement around with my parents and me beginning to assert my own sense of independence that was really squashed. I think because of my parents' fear as the oldest, that they didn't know what to do with it. And that they needed to keep it small would be language that I would use so that they wouldn't be in their fear all the time. And in retrospect, it really shifted things in me where I became really serious. I started reading really serious books. I started listening to different kinds of music. And it was 13, 14. It was kind of like, I think I even heard my mom say something about, you're so serious. And it was like, isn't everything serious? I mean, that's kind of what it felt like inside. And that was a real presiding place for me for decades. I think more than anything was the situation that I recognized. Probably the most significant transition for me was the one I talked about in the intro, was recognizing that I had crossed a threshold with my father, and he wasn't coming. Couldn't come, wouldn't come. I don't know, but that I could not go. And so I moved into this territory that I am still exploring, 30 something years later, that feels vast and wild and uncertain and beautiful and kind of crazy. And I'm meeting other people like you and others who want to know about that territory for themselves. And that has somehow meshed with my calling to be in the world, to both nurture, facilitate, and explore those conversations. So I look back with some real gratitude now on those things that shifted me into seriousness. I also know that I can be really serious about being serious. So part of my spiritual work, literally the last 2 years, is even part of my Lenten practice. The last 2 years is to be playful with this life that I have and the conversation, and just not take myself so seriously.
I would say I'm in that same space with you. I had a similar life experience in my early 20s that brought a very serious tonality to how I approach things. Now walking out of holding on to the gravity and the urgency that is, the preciousness of life, but also being able to enjoy it. And it's an interesting dynamic, I think, with men, how do you hold a sense of like purpose and direction, but also be playful at the same time. That's a beautiful space to occupy if you can live well in that tension.
Yeah. I'll refer to Parker Palmer again. He loves talking about paradox, which I now love talking about paradox. And it seems like in a paradox, we're trying to mesh or merge two dissonant things that don't seem to fit. I think there's a way in which, if I hold a paradox, this is true and this is true, and that they speak to each other on the edges of how they begin to create some sense of integration. And the paradox of all the cultural assumptions about masculinity that we live, and this deep sense of this conversation that will not let go of me, and what I've been doing to give myself to one or the other. Can I allow them both to just be here and just be playful, be courageous, be curious, be scared, be hopeful about what that means and what it's asking of me.
Yeah. Sometimes when I think about these, and God oftentimes talks to me in pictures, is I kind of see those two things as different balloons that are sort of like floating around and rubbing up against each other. But I think the thing that escaped me for a long time in understanding that these are actually two things that I'm not either one or the other. They're meant to be in tension, is the understanding of the conviction that ties the two of them together. So for example, this whole movement, The Future is Family, came from a conviction that God gave me when I was just pressing into my life, kind of the through line from my past, present, and future. And he just kind of downloaded the phrase, the future is family. So for me, when I think about that as being an anchoring conviction in my life, it manifests as I want my children to remain childlike. So there's play involved in that, but I also want them to be courageous and driven and have a sense of purpose. So the two things that at one point felt as polar opposites, actually through the inner journey and the introspection and inviting God into that process, he helped me sort of see where those balloons were tethered together.
That's a great image.
Yeah. I just sort of I see those things. Sometimes they fly around in the breeze, but they often, I'm trying to get them to rub together a lot more frequently than I have before in the past.
Yeah. And in a literal sense, doing that with balloons creates a lot of energy. So it's Yeah, that's good.
Well, I certainly appreciate you being able to spend the time here. And I'd like to ask one more question, one that I like to try to continue through all of these different episodes, which is, what do you hope that your children will say about you after you're gone? I'm like kind of looking at things through a legacy lens. What would you hope that they would say about you when you're gone?
Well, I mean this honestly, and it's a little light. I hope that they're saying, when I'm gone, the things that they're saying about me while I'm here, and that there's a consistency to that. I really do value. I wrote these down because I want to remember them succinctly: consistency, reliability, honesty, kindness, and possibility. And I think it's. I love. And I think for me, that's where the sense of integration comes too. Like, how am I being present to those things and embodying them in the context of family relationship? And I want each of my children to feel seen and know that their place here really matters. And I think my work with them is to continue to craft and hold space that allows that to be not on my agenda for them, but God's desire for them, in whatever form that looks like. I'm pretty confident that all of my kids, we're a blended family, but all of my adult children would say that they experience me as being really consistent and reliable, that they know who I am, they know what I stand for, whether I use language to describe that or not, and that I'm trustworthy. Those are things I continually choose.
Well, I mean, I would, as being someone who's kind of been in your life for, 5+ years, I would confer all of those attributes as well. So
yeah, I'll take some affirmation around that, Chad. Thank you.
The positive love coming
Yeah, I do have if we have a little bit of time, I have a reading. It's probably one of the most notable readings for me. It's from John O'Donohue's Irish priest and poet who unfortunately passed away very early in his life, but has left us with some beautiful language, kind of Celtic informed language. So here it goes. Once you start to awaken, no one can ever claim you again for the old patterns. Now you realize how precious your time here is. You are no longer willing to squander your essence on undertakings that do not nourish your true self. Your patience grows thin with tired talk and dead language. You see through the rosters of expectation, which promise you safety and the confirmation of your outer identity. Now you are impatient for growth, willing to put yourself in the direction of change. You want your work to become an expression of your gift. You want your relationship to voyage beyond the pallid frontiers to where the danger of transformation dwells. You want your God to be wild and to call you to where your destiny awaits.
Wow.
I've got goosebumps just every time I read it. I'm just so so challenged again with his beautiful invitation into this deeper conversation. Put yourself in the way of change.
I love that. It actually it puts a nice punctuation on this feeling that I was feeling through our conversation, where the invitation to, as my wife would say, adventure within, the invitation to do that, it's very courageous. It's very, I think that there is a presiding perspective on introspection that is not manly, where in fact it's actually probably one of the most difficult things you can do, to faithfully and patiently explore these areas, confront fears, overcome them, change your life, integrate discipline. There's this quote that it's always going to stay with me, where it's the most courageous thing you can do is to carry a soft heart in a cruel world. Or how do you actually get to that place where you can love unconditionally everyone, and also stand and also play? It's actually incredibly difficult to get to that place. And I think that what you just read is a beautiful, another beautiful way
Yeah.
of saying that.
Mm-hmm. To put yourself in the way of change is an incredibly vulnerable and humble, risky, courageous thing to do. It means we need help. We're not able to do it by ourselves. And we're not made to do this by ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we're told and often believe that we're supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I certainly appreciate you being our Sherpa
Thank you.
on this journey. Thank you so much. Would you mind kind of closing us out in a prayer for anybody who would be picking this up afterwards?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. God, we're so grateful for your presence in our conversation today. Thank you for the invitation to step across the threshold that each of us is given into the internal landscape of our lives and our soul, of your desires for us. I'm grateful for the ways that Chad has listened well and deeply to the nudging of the Spirit to pursue this conversation. For the ways in which you continually offer us invitations to move deeper and deeper into the truth of who we are, who you dreamed us to be. We're really, really grateful for that today. Amen.
Amen. And then, well, Dane, thank you so much. We will be putting this online, and then any ways in which people will be able to follow up with you, we'll be putting that information on futureids.family, which is our kind of central spot for all this. So thank you. You have certainly blessed our time, and pray that your day goes well, you and your family.
Thanks, Chad. It's great to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dane.